wait for anything to happen.
Okay. Yeah, looks like it came up. So
Just going to check and make sure we're streaming. Looks good. Okay. We're ready.
okay, great. I'd like to call the ad hoc committee on fines to order. Yeah, I'd like to call it to order.
Okay.
All right.
Great. So I just thought, thanks for coming. We don't have a structure here yet. So
Sure.
I was imagining that we could do worse than just, I was going to bring everybody here, give you a quick introduction, and then toss it over to Catherine to go through the binder that she sent out to everybody
Yeah.
that was attached to your email. She's going to do a quick presentation on that, and then questions that you have, we can talk about, and then, any discussion will just come right after that. Does that sound like a good and reasonable plan?
Yeah, that sounds good. I would ask Catherine to go slow though, so that we can really dive into the data. So, because it's great, there's great data there. So, okay, thanks.
Great.
Can I also just say, I don't assume that we've come up with a recommendation tonight either. I think there's so much information that maybe this discussion and maybe we go back and mull and meet. I don't know. So I don't feel the pressure of having to come up with a recommendation tonight because there's just so much material, but I very much appreciate it being there. So.
Fair enough. We just wanted to give the space for this discussion, and I appreciate you taking the time to be here tonight. So we'll be as respectful as your time, while asking Catherine to go as slowly as possible so that she can go through her data. Okay, so I'm going to shut up now, and we're going to toss it over to her, and she's going to share her screen up and start the presentation.
Great, thanks.
I'm also happy to take questions in line. You don't have to wait to the end, so feel free to. I don't think I can see everybody raising your hand, so you can unmute and then just say, "Hold up, I have this question." So I'm really glad we are getting together to talk about this. I think it's really it's a great time, and we have a great opportunity to sit and to think about this a little bit. What I put together, or what we've all put together in these 14 pages, are many different ways to slice the data and to answer the question, what about charging fines at Bethlehem Public Library? So if you're somebody who likes to read the literature, the first page is for you. That's the executive summary. That's in words everything that the packet has. If you're someone who likes to look at some charts and graphs, we have those. And then if you're someone who is interested in where mapping is, we have that information. So we really tried to think about this in as comprehensive and as many ways as possible. So as we begin the first part, there's a quote from the article that was recently published in Library Journal that I think really sums up where the library profession is in moving to share and circulate material without fines. It starts with this in 2017, most libraries were charging fines. There were portions of libraries in America have been not charging fines since 1972. We've looked at documentation from Alameda County in California, where they went fine-free for a few years and were experimenting with it to see if it worked for them. In 2017, there was a little bit more of a movement towards loaning materials without fines. That was in response to this 2015 white paper from Colorado State Library, and we've shared that before. That was focused mainly on children's materials. Building upon that, there was this 2019 policy statement from the American Library Association that imposition of monetary library fines creates a barrier to the provision of library and information services. So then, go ahead, is there a question? So then we moved to some 2018 and some 2019 steps where some libraries in Upper Hudson moved to start lending things fine-free. In the past year, we saw San Francisco Public go fine-free. Chicago in 2019, San Francisco, Chicago start lending things without fines. And then in October 5th, New York City, Brooklyn, and Queens Library summarized all of their research that they've been doing in the past few years and decided to move to circulate materials without fines. They were depending on literature and other research that notes these four things. The literature tells us that small fines do not make a difference in material return, that fines contribute to material attrition when users do not return materials for fear of encouraging large late fees. So that's the concept that when fines are not charged on circulation, items that people have kept because they thought the fine for this book was going to be $100 if they ever gave it back, those materials often come back to a lending library when fines aren't charged anymore. Looking at the literature, there's also a lot of research that notes that not collecting fines really has an impact on circulation desk transactions. The transaction become positively focused, sharing the resources and the services of the library instead of focusing on negative interactions. The literature also tells us that fines create barriers and reduce use of library resources and services. So that's if you're only reading the literature that has been written in the field in the past, at minimum 5 years, you could stop there. But we decided that we have empirical evidence at the library to demonstrate some of these things.
I have a question.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So when it says looking at the literature, we note, that's really it's not Bethlehem Public Library has noted these things. Those findings are from other sources. Is that correct?
We is me and the administrative staff at the library. We're reading the literature, and these are the things that we know reading the literature.
Go ahead, Michelle. My follow-up question would be, to what extent do those themes resonate with the staff at Bethlehem? So if that's what the literature says, does that, I know you're getting into later from your empirical evidence, but those themes, does this seem to match what you experience? I'm not sure you can comment on that or not.
Yeah, we have not surveyed the staff to ask them what their perception of fines are at the library. But I will say that my personal recommendation would be to circulate materials without fines because of what the trends in libraries are today, what the literature notes, and then what I note from our empirical evidence. And sitting right next to the circulation desk all day and having to answer all those fine questions, I definitely feel this. So as a representative of the staff, they note that too, but we haven't surveyed people. All right, so because we had an unfortunate event of a pandemic and we shut down the library for a short period of time, we had a great test case. We could really see what would happen if during the worst case scenario in a pandemic, we stopped charging fines. What would happen? So we used this experiment and we noted, and I say we because I rarely say I, but I noted that due dates encourage return of library materials. That's because even when we don't charge fines, the majority of items are returned before a due date, and the most popular date that items are returned are the day they're due. So most of our items that come in have 0 days late. Most library materials are returned an average of 4 days before due dates, and that was during the deepest, darkest days of the pandemic. When we lended materials fine-free, there was a negligible but known impact on that material return, and this was the negligible impact. When we have fines, and this is what the charts in section 5.2 will tell us. When we have fines, 90% of our items are checked out on time. This is an amazing return rate. If you look at most of our peers in Upper Hudson and most of our peers across the country, it's not that high. When we aren't charging fines, 80% of our items are returned on time. And if you give us 3 days, we're back to 90% of items being returned. So if our concerns are with material return, we gather that within 3 days. But if that's not enough for you, when we start looking at fines and equity, I note that there's a negative correlation between median income and fines owed, as well as median home income, home value and fines owed, which means If you make more money or you live in a bigger house that is worth more, the mean amount of dollars owed for the individuals in your census block are lower than individuals who have lower income and lower home values. If we looked at these equity questions across a broader district than just the Bethlehem School District, if we had more of a dynamic range between these census block data for income and home value, it'd be much clearer to see these relationships. We can see it a little bit on the graphs or the GIS mapping in section 4, but the last section where there's a regression analysis, it's very, very clear, and it's statistically significant that there's a relationship between how much money that people owe in your census block and how much money they make. Number 2 shows us that there's a little bit of a relationship between these things when we map people who have library cards, people who owe fines, and the amount of fines that they have overlaid on their census block. The third point says that 15% of our youth cards are blocked and 12% of our adult cards are blocked due to fines or replacement costs owed over $5. Our fourth bullet tells us that our fine revenue has decreased year over year as we implement some services to the public. And our fifth bullet point tells us that we were able to absorb any loss of fines revenue during the 2020 pandemic. And our sixth bullet point just lets us see that a disproportionate number of younger adults and youth, and younger adults, being pretty generous as to saying like under 50 years old, they hold fines in a distribution that doesn't match the distribution of age ranges by card holders. So if you're an older card holder, you usually owe less than the younger card holders by age. So if you're good with just literature, that should be enough for you. But we wanted to delve into where we got this data and give you some different ways of looking at it.
Actually, I have another question.
Yeah.
When you say the library absorbed it, what do you mean?
That the library still functioned without the $25,000 that came in, that was budgeted. Our budget absorbed the difference.
Well, meaning that we just didn't spend, we weren't at a position where we needed an extra 25,000. I mean, the money would have been there. Otherwise it would have been part of our budget.
Yes.
Yeah. And 2, it seems like the data was collected at a slant. It seems like the data is specifically collected to, there's just a very strong slant on removing fines and not really a lot of information here on what, say, an extra $25,000 would have been used for in the library budget or, yeah. All right. Okay. Sorry. You can go on.
Thank you. So the second graph lets us see the number of kids that are blocked, what that percentage is, what's the total amount owed. And these numbers are a bit of an artifice. So even though there's $78,000 that's owed by all library cards that are blocked, the library will not recoup that amount. That is, some of that could be paid by replacement costs if people need to return things and they'd like to use their library card again. But that's not really money that would return tomorrow. Some of those are fines are like 10 or 15 years old. So I wanted us to see that big number of all of the money that is owed for kids and adults.
And how do you define a kid? Is 18 under?
Yes.
Okay.
And that's a current amount, is that correct, Catherine?
Yes.
Okay.
I think this is a great graph. I'm actually really excited about the numbers that this show for us. It shows, if I can get it up here, what is the percentage of card holders by age in the district? And what is the percentage of card holders? What are the percentage of people by certain age brackets in the district? And then what is that percentage by card holders? And I'm very happy to see that we have so many, when we break down the percentage of how many 10 to 19, 20 to 29, 30 to 39, we're only about 3% off of what the distribution would be across the district. So I think we have a pretty matching number of people who have library cards. It's a pretty accurate representation of the age ranges in the district, except for kids 0 to 9. And I think that's just because parents have cards for their kids instead of kids always having cards. Now, the total money owed by age range doesn't follow the same distribution. And what I could do is put this in a histogram for you so that they overlay each other. But people under 49 owe the most across the entire population of cardholders than the distribution of those age ranges. And if I, my people are covering up my cup. If I go back to the distribution of age ranges, if you can see that pattern, it's not the same for younger borrowers.
So going back to that graph, so what you're saying there is that people under 50 owe the majority of the money. That's the takeaway.
Yes. Yep. And this isn't.
Yeah. Is it really under 40 though? I mean.
Yeah, probably under 40.
Yeah.
They're pretty high.
Pretty high. They're 40 to 49. Yeah, okay.
And this is not percentage. This is
real
absolute.
Dollar.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. This is just interesting to see how pandemic users, it's the same absolute scale, how people use the library. So people with, the total amount of fines still use the library a little bit.
So I don't understand that graph. So you're saying
it's it's the pandemic users. They're not really being represented by how much money people owe. These younger people weren't really using us in the pandemic. They owe more money.
So pandemic users, the money on pandemic users in the library.
Yeah, young people. Well, the people who use the library didn't owe as much as everybody, the total amount owed.
Okay. All right.
Let me just, maybe I can help here because I think it's just a matter of semantics. This dark blue graph basically represents the age ranges and the amount of people who owed money for fines during the pandemic. Is that correct?
Yes.
So the only difference between the two graphs is the time period.
Yes.
And then the data shakes out differently.
Yes.
Okay.
So if I was a 45-year-old person, and I used the library during the pandemic, and I didn't, and I had a fine, and I didn't return the book, and we didn't have fines then, right? So,
this is still ongoing fines. So you could have had $45 of fines from 2015.
Okay.
And we still made sure that you were able to use the library because it was mostly electronic usage. And if your card wasn't expired, if it had still been active.
Okay.
I would like, we could probably park here because I feel like this might be moving the discussion in the wrong direction.
No, I'm just trying to figure out to understand the chart. That's all. Yeah. Lisa, you had a question?
I was going to say, so that means that there weren't blockages on cards during the pandemic.
Not when there was a shutdown. No, not for databases.
So does that skew some of these numbers? I don't know.
What we did a lot of work. We were trying to figure out who were the 6,000 to 8,000 people who used us the whole time that we were shut down. Like
Mhm.
who are the core library users? We tried to figure out a bunch of different ways. Where do they live? You know, do they vote in elections? Do they, how much fines do they have? What was their age range? We were really trying to figure out like, well, who are the users of the library who would use us no matter what? And then who wasn't using the library, and how do we get them involved in a time where we're not in a pandemic?
Mhm.
So again, on this chart, it's not overall users, it's people who owed money. I think that's,
No,
I think
these were-
the word users and money are getting kind of somehow conflicted or conflated.
So again, if I was a 45-year-old man and used the library during that pandemic period, this is how much I owed money from the past, it would show up on the blue chart.
Yes,
Okay. But if I didn't owe money from the past, it would not show up in the blue chart.
right.
Okay.
No, I'm sorry. Say it again. I'm sorry.
If I was current on my account and then I said, well, they're not, as a quote, high flyer for frequent flyer for fines. But I kept using the library, right? So I had to be under $5, I guess, in the prior pandemic. Then I used the library, things change, right? So I used the library during the pandemic. Where would I show up in any of this information here?
Yes, this is just what is the total amount owed by people who use the library during the pandemic.
And that they could owe it at any time in the prior period, not just pandemic.
Right. This was not fines or replacement cost accrued during the pandemic.
Right, because you don't have the information. You didn't charge them.
Right.
Okay. I think I understand that. All right. That's cool.
Okay.
Thank you.
So these are numbers you're familiar with. These are the budgeted numbers for what we thought we would take in fines, and then what is the actual revenue collected. So we have continually budgeted less for fines from 2015 to 2016 at 51,000 to down to 30,000 in fiscal year 2019 to 2020. And in this last fiscal year, $15,000 are being budgeted for fines alone. Our revenues collected has decreased over that time period as well. 2020 to 2021 being an odd year, people still paid about $3,000 in fines, either from Bethlehem owned materials at another library or those old fines that they would have accrued in 2019 or 2018 or sometime when we were charging fines. We did take in some money.
So the drop off in between 18, 19, 19, 20, that has a couple pandemic months, right?
18, 19.
35 to 23. That's a big
through
drop.
through June 2020. So
You'd have
that March to
March,
June.
May.
April,
Yeah.
May.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. All right. Okay. So we mapped it out. This green chart shows the addresses. I can probably make it a little smaller. The addresses of Bethlehem Library card holders across the district. Green means they have a library card. Red means that they owe more than $50. There's you could probably see a couple of patterns. You see most of our users reside in the town of Bethlehem. Fewer users reside over here in the New Scotland break. Without those green dots, we would just see a bunch of red dots and you wouldn't see where the concentration of cardholder addresses is. I see a couple of patterns here along Route 9. Here is Delaware. Here is Kenaware. But it's not abundantly clear where addresses that may owe fines live compared to other areas. This lets us just see what the district looks like. If we compared this to all of Albany County, it'd be much clearer where those blocked cards are compared to the non-blocked residents. The last chart shows us a regression to note a significant relationship. But this is a little, it's okay that it's messy and it's harder to differentiate the addresses because it's addresses that owe over $50. This is a similar map, but instead of looking at addresses that owe over $50, the purple dots show us who has a blocked card with an average amount owed of over $5. The dark blue, the whole thing is, the whole district is mapped in black. And then there's census blocks where the median household income is in these ranges on the left. The lighter the block, the lower the median house income. And you can see some groupings here. Not too many people live over here, not too many groupings. Here's some groupings over here, but it's still not very easy to tell. We mapped it out though, so we could take a look.
Can I ask you on that diagram? Don't leave it yet. So that's what I was trying to discern. It looks like the majority of people fall into the 87.4 to 124.4 range. Is that your sense? Even though the geography, I'm sure the households are, there are fewer households as you move towards the whichever direction of the map is, I guess, this New Scotland or whatever. But I guess it's hard to tell because the density, it depends on the density, but in terms of land mass, which may not equal households, is the 87.4 to 124.4 the main? That's what I was trying to, when I was looking at this before, I was like, I'm trying to figure out what this one says.
The land mass shows that people live in the 87.4 to 124.4, but that doesn't necessarily mean the number of that's the majority of households. There's this little triangle up here. This little triangle, it's 50,004 to 87.4. It's the same as Glenmont over here. And I always, this triangle pops up when we talk about a lot of, we talk about like broadband. 10% of the users here don't have broadband at their house. So this little triangle looks like I see a higher relationship between purple dots to green dots, but I'm not very good at differentiating the dots. So I had to do a regression. That was much easier for me to understand. And that's the last chart.
Where geographically is that last little triangle that you showed?
This is 85 that comes down and around. This is Kenwood. This is Delaware. And this is Fisher Boulevard, I think, right here.
Okay.
I think it's no, because this is Cherry. I think it's this little like Cherry, Delaware, Kenwood.
I thought of it as like the area close to Ellesmere School. That's what I was trying to figure out.
I think Ellesmere is this right here.
Oh, okay.
On the east side of the district.
Okay.
Okay.
This is if you just look at the people whose cards are blocked. This graph, you can see pockets of houses here and here, but without knowing what words are, sometimes it just looks like extra dots. This is the census data with the households. This is census data with median household income and the houses that owe over $50. I see a clustering here and here, that triangle. I'm going to move one thing. I'm going to go to section 6, and then I'm going to come back to section 5. So the mapping didn't do it for me. And this, I had to investigate a little bit further. When I map, or when I do a regression of home values by census block compared to the mean money owed by census block, there's a significant relationship. And it's significant because my p-value is higher than 0.05. It's lower than 0.05. It's significant when it's lower than 0.05. There is a negative correlation to how expensive your home is to how much money you owe. More expensive home, the people in your census block owe less in the library. It is also true for median income by census block and the mean money owed by other individuals who are in your census block. This is also significant because my p-value is lower than 0.05. I wondered if what I saw in economic gradations in the district would relate to demographics in the district. So I looked at what is the percentage of persons of color in census blocks compared to the mean amount of money owed by the same individuals in that census block, so where they live. And while this line goes up, it's not a significant relationship. The p-value is higher than 0.05. So while I could see there was a relationship with economics, I couldn't see a relationship through demographics. If I did the reverse map, which of course it's the same information, just in the inverse, what is the percentage of white population by a census block compared to the mean money owed by that census block? While it looks like there might be a little bit of a relationship, it's not significant.
It looks like, can you go, so that p-value is 0.6777. And what was the other one?
It's 0.67, 0.67.
Yeah, so
I mean, it's the
It's
same
very
thing.
close.
It's the same data, just mapped inversely.
Okay.
But it is significant greatly by the other measure. And just so, like, what does it mean to be significant? The smaller the p-value is, this little green bar, the less likely the observation is. So it's less likely that this was just a variable due to chance. The p-value is related to this little green, how likely it is under the possibility curve. That was more helpful for me to understand relationship in the district than mapping. If we had a larger dynamic range between home values and income in the district, I think if we were looking across Albany County, that mapping relationship would be much more obvious. It's what's obvious in New York City, and it's what's obvious in San Francisco. And it does apply to our school district. So section 5 lets us look at contingency tables. So what if there's two things we're talking about, charging fines and not charging fines? In 2019, Upper Hudson libraries who had decided to stop charging late fines participated in a fine-free experience. And they presented these statistics. The first line in this chart is a school district public library in Upper Hudson who is fine-free. The second line in the chart is an association library in the Upper Hudson Library District that is fine-free. And the last line is a municipal library. So the first thing I note is that their number of late materials, remember when we charge fines, 10% of our items come back late. Their late check-ins were really high, 26%, 22%, and 20%. When we circulated materials without fines, we were the equivalent of their best case scenario. Once these libraries started circulating materials without fines, their late fees increased to 32%, 24%, and 22%. So that's 78% of their material. The best library has 78% of the materials coming back on time. So if we run the same numbers, comparing 2 years of fine and fine-free data, the 2 years are 2018 and 2019, we looked at fines. I looked at the period of 2020 where we didn't charge fines. That's the July to December numbers. And the period of 20 to 21 when we didn't charge fines, the January to June numbers. And I looked at those same, I think the 2018 and 2019 is the same period of time as the 2020, those 6 months. The on-time return for the materials in the 2 years where we charged fines were 90%. The on-time return in the darkest days of the pandemic was 71%. And in 2021, from January to July, our on-time return was 80%. If we gave ourselves or gave patrons another 3 days, only 11% of materials came in late. So in the worst case scenario, with 3 days, 80% of materials came back. And about 90% of materials came back 3 days late in 2021.
Catherine, I have a question.
Yes.
Is it 90% of the same? It goes 90 to 90 to 72 to 80, whatever. Is that of the same percentage? How do I want to phrase this question? The 90% was a normal circulation. The 71.26%, was that of pandemic circulation? Do you understand what I'm asking?
Yes. Yep. It's much lower. It's 38,000 loans, but the 80% we looked at was 116,000 loans. So 80% was the equivalent of the 2019, 2018 numbers. Those on time are the raw numbers, not the percentages.
So definitely during 2020, the circulation, the overall circulation, you're looking at that first column, the overall circulation is significantly lower during 2020. But we knew that just the circulation of physical materials, but we're, those 6 months before we started charging fines again in 2021, that's a much normal, that's more than we circulated in a similar time in 2018.
So just so I understand again, the percentage, the 71.26% of all the books that were out, is that correct? 71% of all the books that were out came back.
No, 71% of all the books that were returned on time, the day they were due.
Okay. But again, it's during a pandemic when not the library was not being used in the same way. Okay. All right. Thank you.
And is it just books or other material too?
It's all materials. It's all
Okay.
materials.
Right.
We could go down and look at the numbers based on books versus DVDs. But
Mostly books,
Yeah,
though, right?
before you leave this chart though, go stay there for a second. How I read that was, if you go back down, was I just went across, and so the top in 2018 of the material that was out there within 3 days of the due date, so 3 days late, you got 92% as returned. In 2019, you get close to 96, comes in within 3 days of the due date. 92.5 is with the no fines, and 92 is with the no fines in 2021. That's how I just added it across within 3 days. So, during the pandemic and things, I assume that people just had other things going on, but within 3 days of the due date. So things were technically late, but they came in, generally speaking, within 92%, except for the year of 2019, which was up to like 90, close to 96, right? So basically, within 3 days, it kind of shakes out at 92, except for that 1 year.
yes,
In the 3 days is a grace period for fines.
no, we give a 1-day grace period for some materials. 3 days was just like what,
Yeah, that's cool.
what, yeah. I mean, I think there's a big difference between being late and being really late. And I thought,
Yeah.
well, what is it at 3 days?
Right. No, that's good. So can you read, and I guess I would ask, in the pandemic year being so different, there were people they didn't feel the pressure of the due date because there was no fines. Can you say that? Or
I think the pandemic year is weird because we had a lot of quarantine variations. So this does take into
right.
effect the
Yeah.
times when we had a 4-day quarantine during whatever those dates were. I removed the 4 days. And then when we had a 3-day
Right.
quarantine, that section of the data, you had to remove 3 days. And then 2-day quarantine. So there's just a lot of variation with all of circulation during that time period.
right. Okay.
2021, it's much more normal. That January to July, I don't think we're at a 4-day quarantine at in that January time period, but that's when we start kind of lowering our quarantine. People are coming in more.
Right.
Okay. There's a little bit of curbside only, but we just are ramping up more people coming in. So it's a more realistic fine-free period than the fall of 2020, which was we didn't have people in the building until September. We were doing curbside July and August only. So it's an experiment, but it's a weird experiment.
And qualitatively, you don't know why. You didn't
Right.
survey people, so we don't have the life stories of people to say, well, I didn't feel the pressure, or I had kids at home, I
Right.
couldn't get into a car. So we don't know. The numbers tell us some, but not the parsing of why.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, 2020 seems like people will study it 20 years from now, but it seems weird to figure out, right now.
I was heartened to see that even in our hardest period of circulation during the pandemic, we're still getting a higher on-time return rate than what was given to us in the 2019 numbers from those 3 other libraries.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So the other way to look at it, if you're a histogram person, was, and this chart you've seen before, that in this part, the 2020 of this time period is when fines were charged. So you've got 2 years, 2019 and 2020, where you have a borrowing pattern that lays directly over it, where fines are charged. And then you have 2021, where you have some period where people aren't charging fines. And this is the difference in return rate of materials. It's very small.
Mhm.
This is, people are bringing things back the day that they're due here. You could say that was from fines. But if this is my highest peak in 2021, then the due date itself has an effect on returns. It has an effect, a positive effect. It's the most returned time of days returned late. 0 is the most frequent time someone returns an item. That's a histogram is like a frequency table. Everything underneath this line is equal to 1.
Right.
So that's what we looked at. We were able to replicate the experiences of other libraries in San Francisco and in New York City, showing a relationship between equity and money owed. We were able to do something libraries are not doing in the literature too much, looking at the effect of the return rate for items when there's no fines. And then we were able to run an experiment and see what lending materials without fines it does to our circulation. Oh, the one thing I did not mention, this was a question that Mark had. What are the libraries that are not charging fines right now? So that list was, I'm sorry, what is who's charging fines and who's not charging fines in Upper Hudson? The libraries that are charging fines include us, Berlin, Colony, East Greenbush, Manans, North Greenbush. It's under discussion at Guilderland right now. Rensselaer, Valley Falls, Watervliet, Westerlo. So the libraries who are peer size, Bethlehem, Colony, East Greenbush, Guilderland's under discussion.
Great. Thanks, Catherine. I appreciate that.
Very helpful. Yeah.
Okay.
So I have a couple questions. One of them is the policy on when you block access at a $5 mark.
Mm-hmm.
Is how, like, what in history is that? Did we ever change that? Does that move to go up or down? Like, kind of how is that?
It went up. So it used to be $2 when I
Okay.
came. First of all, we were charging 3 cents for children's materials and a
Okay.
dime. Because you still see some old kids' books with the 3 cents scratched out of the back because it was printed right on the pocket, because that was a good move. In any case, so it was $2. It was where the accounts were blocked, and we just sort of came upon the idea that should be $5. And then the other fine thing that changed significantly was that movies, whether they were VHS or DVD, were charged $1. And we dropped those down to the same price as books, just to note their lack of preciousness. Now, that said, we still charge fines for higher fines for things that are indeed precious. So museum passes, interlibrary loan books, things that need to come back, we still charge $1 a day. Just because the idea is that those are more important that those come back quickly.
Do you know of any library that has, not to keep splitting the atom here, but a book access policy or a blockage policy that's different depending on age?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. So this actually got started in Upper Hudson. One of the things you may have, if you've been kicking around long enough, you may have heard me talking about the My Card thing. That started when this began. Albany Public Library, the Rochester Public Library, those the big city libraries in New York State. When they started looking at this, it was at first specifically directed towards children's materials or towards children's cards, and then talk about splitting the hairs. Was it the material or the card that was important? And that came out of a study at Rochester where half of the kids' cards were unusable because they had either been, they were over the fines rate, or their parents had run the fines up on their cards, and they were unable to use the library. And it was absolutely not the desired outcome of the library that kids not be able to borrow. So absolutely, that's a stage that a lot of the libraries have been through. And typically in Upper Hudson, what happened at first was they moved to this My Card model, where you'd limit the total number of items that the child in this particular case can check out. So you'd say, oh, 3 or 5, this number is whatever, let's call it 5. Check out 5 items. There's never any fines on them. But in order to check, if you've got 5, if you want to check out another one, you got to bring one back and then you can check one out. Bring 3 back, check out 3 more. So it limits the number. And then they were able to, that was an amount of items that the libraries felt they could tolerate for loss without the parental signature. So they were, issuing those cards to kids without the necessity of having a parent's signature. Because sometimes that can seem very easy for us to get your parents to come in and sign, but in some communities was incredibly onerous and prevented children from being able to use the library. So
the I guess in the children's area, is there a practice of, I see kids come in and take a bunch of books, right?
Yep.
Are they on their card or their parents' card, or how does that?
I think Catherine answered, that's one of the things that we were looking at was, and I'm going to go and Catherine's going to correct me when I'm wrong. But you can see the percentage of use for those 0 to 9-year-olds is smaller than expected because a lot of the checkouts happened on the parent's card.
Right. And do you have a cap of materials?
No,
For any
just
kids or adults?
what you can carry. There are specific types of materials that are capped, but
Okay.
not just general library items.
So if I want to go get, 10 kids books for the week.
Yep.
And I'll, my kids that I'll set up or maybe 2 or 3 kids, like 10 or 15, they're not capped in any way.
No, and that's really more the expectation, especially with children's materials. I mean, with adult materials, if you took 15 mysteries out,
Yeah.
that's a lot of mysteries. But if you take 15 kids books out, that's
Right.
not a lot. That's a small amount of books to check out.
Okay. Okay. Carolyn, do you have some questions quick?
Yes, I could send them out tomorrow too, but
Okay.
2 questions that I think one is a quick answer and one not so much. The first one, is there any year in the last 5 years where if we took away the amount of fines that we took in, that we would have been in the red, that our budget would not have been able to absorb it?
No, because and remember we have a capital line.
Yeah.
It's not to say that money's coming from nowhere. I'm not saying that, but at no point would the whole budget been in the red on that. It would have been less amount of money available for capital projects.
Got it. And then my second question is, and I don't think this has come up, but Jeff, are there any local libraries that use the guilt method that have like a guilt jar at the circulation desk where it
Sure.
says, hey, we're not charging fines, but if you brought a late material, you're welcome to give what you'd like. And do we have any data on what that brings in?
I don't have any data on what that brings in. I can ask around about who. I think that may be a thing that libraries move through as they go on this journey. So I will ask around. I will ask that specific question, and I will get you an answer back for that.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Mark, I was just going to say, I did just a quick search today because you were asking about kids and youth and fines. And the LA County Library has a reading program where for every hour spent reading, $5 in fines are waived. And I thought that was a creative solution to the problem of younger people having larger fines. I just wanted to point that out because you had asked specifically about that.
Right. I mean, I think a lot of these discussions, Michelle, you're exactly right. A lot of these discussions in marketing, it starts with the library, and I think we would all agree on the statement. The library has a vested interest in making sure that children are reading, right? And that's true of every public library in every community of every stripe all across the country. That is a thing that is important. And, I think this discussion, these discussions that continue to happen across the country are how do we bring our policies into accordance with that? And, I think, Catherine's point is well taken. In communities where there is a larger distribution of home value and median income, then you see larger disparities in those fines owed and the percentage of cards that are blocked. And that's why, I mean, it's not a surprise that in both Upper Hudson, statewide and nationwide, the larger cities were some of the first places to, in this resurgence of fines, beginning to look at going fine free, and went through the My Card process and all of these things. This is not unrelated. Though that said, some libraries are just fine free. That's Post and Kill, right? Has been fine free since ever. That's the way they roll. So that's the opposite of a big city. But that's just I would have considered that an outlier, certainly 10 years ago. So
LA County also decided to start lending materials fine free a few months ago.
This article was just from this month. Are you talking about the same library?
LA County Library System.
Oh, okay. All right.
I think Jeff's absolutely right. There's been a journey, and many libraries have gone through a number of iterations. Like, how do we not hold people accountable for mistakes, or charge compliance fees for things that they've done? And a lot of libraries will do reading things, or they'll do fine amnesty, or they'll
donation for food. Yeah.
Donations for food. Yeah. There's lots of different ways to work this through. And I think a lot of libraries have said, we think that we want people reading. We don't want them paying fines. And eventually they were just like, forget it. We're just going to make it simple and have a policy change instead of a programmatic change.
I was going to say, I remember when the My Card discussion started at Upper Hudson, and I want to say it was Albany and like Brunswick that were talking about doing it.
Yep.
And that wasn't that long ago, really.
No,
And
this is
to think about, how many local of the other libraries in Upper Hudson have in a short period of time moved to removing fines. It's really kind of impressive to see. And it hasn't, like at the Upper Hudson level, it hasn't been really reported, So when I saw that data that you gave us, Jeff, I was like, well, I'm kind of surprised by that, because
it was interesting.
Really across the board.
It was interesting when I called Natalie, because she's been talking to libraries about this, and they actually called her in to talk to the Guilderland trustees. That's why I happened to find out that this is exactly the exact discussion. Everything that we're talking about is exactly what libraries are like us across the state, across Upper Hudson. All of these conversations is exactly the same conversation that they're having right now. And what Natalie said to me, because I said, what libraries don't charge fines in response to one of Mark's emails. She said, it's easier for me to list the libraries that charge fines. And that's not true a couple of years ago, certainly not true 5 years ago, but it's, it is just, this is an evolving thing. It's a complicated thing. And it's a topic that's worthy some discussion. That's why I wanted to thank all of you for being here, because it was, we wanted to give an opportunity to muscle in on this. We've been talking about this as a board for lots of years. When it first started, when the My Card started, the arguments or the thought processes were much more, maybe a little bit visceral, a little bit more. This seems like the right thing or not the right thing. Those were the kind of discussions we were having, and I thought it was important that we have some data to look at as well, and in lots of different ways. And believe me, we slice and dice this stuff to try to find where, what's significant, what's not significant. So I appreciated having Catherine on that, because that's way deeper than my brain's going to work.
Mm-hmm.
So my comment would be, and not that this would circumvent the discussion of the trustees, but my flat out would ask you, what is the recommendation of the staff and why? I'm just curious, and then we can continue to discuss, but I assume,
right,
coming from the school district, oftentimes we're responding to a recommendation or a policy recommendation from the staff, and then the Board of Ed hashes it out, and not that whatever you say we should rubber stamp, but I assume
right,
that you've been thinking about this for a long time. So what would be your recommendation to the board, or what would you support if you have that information, if you have that position, and why?
Right. So I'll take the hubris of speaking for the staff, which is not at all unified on this, but our admin staff is. For me personally, again, Catherine and I were just talking about this today. The compelling argument for me has started with and always has been, when it comes to fines, I feel that it unnecessarily creates more negative interactions. Having been the head of circulation, as Catherine is now, seeing, coming up not through the information side of the library, not through the public services side of the library, but coming in through circulation, having worked circulation in a couple of different libraries, the negative interactions over 30 cents makes me crazy. And I still get them, right? So the people who are there's some magical thing that happens for people who wouldn't bend over and pick a buck up off the ground, will argue for 10 minutes in the library about a 30-cent fine. And I'm like, we are way in the red on this. Like, just to have this conversation, just bringing me out here to have this conversation, and why should a squeaky person not have to pay fines? If you have a policy that already, that we're going to, we're going to waive that fine because of, whatever the reason, we have a policy that needs to be discussed. And so for me, that's the compelling argument, but and it always has been. It's about the perception in the community and those negative interactions. And that said, there are plenty of people that come in and say, you've got $25 in fines. They fork over $25. There's a smile on their face and they walk out the door. But the negative interactions that I have at the circulation desk tend to focus on this. I think I will have said in the past that I think it takes people to third grade, like, you're in trouble. You owe us 30 cents. And we tried to reframe this. This is back before I was in the director. We tried to reframe this as fee for extended use. It's not a fine. It's a fee for extended use. Like, you're going to pay 10 cents a day because you want your book for a little bit longer. We tried that for a good year, and it didn't change anything. It's words. Sometimes words are important. In that case, the words were not particularly important. So for me, it's that those negative interactions with a significant number of people. And when we're at the circ desk, I would love to be able to turn the folks at the circ desk from gatekeepers to helpers, which is what they're supposed to do. And I think the librarians at the information desk get to have this. I mean, those of us who have chosen to get in this field, we feed off the fact that we're helping people. That's what we want to do. And I think that the relationship with the circulation desk is a different relationship. And that part of it is because of the fines. There you go.
Well, I don't know how much longer we're going to be talking tonight, given time. I'm fine just continuing, but here's my 2 cents. And I'm newest on the trustees, and because of my background, I have been asked both by our library and for Upper Hudson to share perspectives on equity and diversity for hours. And I've gotten tools, I've recommended consultants, I've had discussions. It's all been fine. And from what I've heard from our library, and even from Upper Hudson, is there is a significant effort to look at disparities that are either consciously or unconsciously perpetuated by either practices, policies, or assumptions and attitudes. So although I think we should spend some more time thinking about it, the charts about economically disadvantaging people's use of the library based on their economic position within this community is a compelling one for me. So I'll put that out there. So.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And the other side of this coin is the collection of the fines and the resources needed to collect the fines. So I remember we talked about that a couple of years ago. I think is that if you eliminated fines, you're eliminating a work effort. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean 1.683 FTEs, or
Right.
something like that. But if you turn the fine mechanisms off, like say we're not going to do fines, you have relieved a burden on a certain portion of the staff. Correct?
Yes.
And admin piece of this too.
Right. And we still need to collect, we have compelling reasons to collect money, right? Because lost and damaged materials need to be paid for. That's just, that's a thing. So there will be some monetary mechanisms that continue to need to exist because that we still need to collect that. That said, that's a significantly smaller, and Catherine, correct me if I'm wrong, that is significantly smaller than the amount of money we collect for fines.
And when does a book become lost?
After 30 days of being overdue.
Right.
It's like 31 days.
And that's the other date that libraries play with, right? When is something, Catherine, I don't know if you want to talk about this. But
No,
yeah.
you're absolutely right.
When, if you, for the libraries that eliminate fines as part of the transaction, might declare an item lost faster than 30 days because the fines aren't accruing. They might say, oh, we're going to declare it lost at a week. And then that will generate a bill. And as long as you accept the printing cost and the mailing cost, or however you get that bill to them, they get a bill. Oh, $60 because I've got 5 kids books out. I've got a bill for $60, and then they come back and they bring the book back. That's the goal, right? And so then there's not a fine on the back side of that for us. Right now we when that happens, they still get a bill after 30 days. They're like, oh my goodness, $150 for all those DVDs. They bring them back, and then there's whatever the fines might be, $3 if it's a month late, or if it's 50 days late, that'll be $5, and that's where it caps off per item. Which isn't to say that people don't get themselves into a little bit of pickle every once in a while. Mark, to your point about kids books,
yeah,
you got a stack of kids books this high and you return them late. And that's, I think, another argument why sometimes the libraries have that discussion about children's materials, because you check them out by the 30, and
right.
Each one is an item the same as one mystery is an item. So
okay, so then you still have to have a lost collection.
Yep, it doesn't completely. And I know you asked about ROI. We spent some time on this. I still think there might be an answer for us.
We
really
looked at what's the average transaction cost, like what's the cost of the average transaction, and it's like $3.40. So of the 20 transactions that happen in 3 hours, and one of them is a $24 replacement charge, the rest of them are 50 cents, $1.75, with an average of $3.42. So that's a lot of time spent, capturing quarters. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
We talked a little bit earlier today, Jeff and I, about other compliance fees that we don't charge anymore. We don't charge you $1 because you didn't rewind your VHS tape. And, there are things that we do to your materials that you return. We charge your launch pads. We make sure your Wi-Fi hotspots are charged. We still do work on things, but we don't charge you, $5 because your playaway still has a battery in it. So there's a lot of compliance fees that we were like, those are archaic. We're not doing that anymore.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a little bit more time. I don't know if people have more time, but is there any questions of Catherine or of Jeff? Information requests or other thoughts on the subject?
See, I'd almost like to see, and not that you would have to, like a twiddling of the date of when something's declared lost and a bill is generated.
Yeah.
If that gets the material back in,
faster, right.
So that could, that would be something I would throw out there as people consider options. Is okay. So it's a month, maybe it's 2 weeks, and that if people say, oh my gosh, I've got to pay $40, maybe it comes back. I don't know if 2 weeks is enough time, but that for me is a more palatable option than finding people, nickeling and diming people, for every day that they're overdue.
Catherine, do you remember what Albany changed to for their lost?
I think new DVDs are like 3 days or 7 days.
Yeah, that's fast. That's too fast. Yeah.
I was going to say,
something.
Yeah, just as a library user and probably a heavy library user, I would say I had already noticed that. And you can definitely see, as you're looking for availability across the catalog, which libraries are probably doing that.
Yeah, because you'll see a lot of items in that lost status.
Yeah,
then,
that say lost.
Higher percentage. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. The other policy lever I was thinking about is you can take that $5 up to like 25.
Yep.
Or you could eliminate it for kids.
We tried to.
We're never going to block a kid's card. Like you could have
Well-
a policy like, or you can only do it for like, $50 or something, some crazy outlier number.
Right. You do it for, I mean, I think, you could do that for lost materials, or, I mean, I think that's the genesis of the My Card. That model
Yeah.
exists yeah, that exists. I think it's a pretty good model. They've kind of came up with a standard My Card model.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I want to rebrand it though in some way. I mean, it's a My Card seemed like a whole rebranding thing, whatever. I don't
Yeah.
know, but you could, if you're worried about access, which we all are, then say, okay, well, you can have fines up to a higher amount, or you could say, we're going to give you a 3-day grace period instead of 1 day, or, you could play around with those numbers too.
Yep.
I don't know, I'm not sure what, at some point, like, are we just compromising the principle? But those are some policy levers I was thinking we could play with too
Right.
as well.
Listen, there's libraries on all of these things. There's libraries across the country that are doing every one of these things. There's nothing that we're talking about.
Right.
Not to say that we're not special, because we are.
We are
But everything that we're talking about is exactly being talked about by libraries just like us, probably tonight. So, it's an important thing to talk about. So again, I appreciate your time here tonight.
Yeah.
So-
And that said, I would rather that Bethlehem lead than Bethlehem follow.
Mhm.
If we have the resources, and again, I'm still listening. Of course, I'm leaning to one side, but I'm open to other opportunities. We have the resources. What can we do to maximize usage, to minimize stigmatization of people who may already be stigmatized in this community, having had conversations with parents about what kids wear and what kids have and who has cars, and there's a number of ways that class shows up in this community where people are stigmatized based on their income and where they live and how they live.
Well, and to also piggyback on that, I think some of the statistics that we looked at, and I'm not, Catherine, your presentation made me like go back to my master's degree. I was like, oh my God, do I remember these statistics? But anyway, I feel like if fines, and I think what we're seeing in the pandemic allowed us to see it, right? To some degree. I mean, everything wasn't exactly the same, but I think we originally, probably many of us thought that fines cause people to behave in a certain way, right? We expect people to behave differently when they do have to pay a fine versus if they don't. And what I think the statistics really show is, no, they sort of act the same. So for me, if that's the case, what's the point of charging the fine for all these other reasons that Charmaine raised? There's no real reason, in light of where we are as a library, to go down that path, in my opinion. I mean, and it's really contrary to what I think when I first started thinking about this whole issue, where I thought I would land. So that's good.
Okay, great. Any other
Sorry,
questions?
it took me a second to unmute.
Sure.
I would just offer the opposing view that the budget, when you say things like it absorbs the money, it was a loss. It didn't, the money's not free. It definitely was a loss, even though it's only a small percentage of our budget overall. We voted down less. And I really think the costs of housing our collections and staffing the library, maintaining services and new programs continues to rise every year. So anything that affects the budget, I think that we have a fiduciary responsibility to look at it as a financial issue. It is a loss of money. And especially as we're heading into a possibly large capital project.
Yep,
Absolutely.
I agree with that, and I definitely think that all the trustees should definitely weigh in. And what I might suggest is maybe we take a week or two, everyone mull, and maybe do a calendar and see if we can come back for another hour or so and see if there's let everyone sit with it for a bit and then reconvene, and if that were, I don't know, that's what I would throw out as a suggestion.
I don't feel like I need another committee meeting. But we are going back to the board, right? The board's going to
Oh, yeah.
discussion and a vote. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I always feel squeamish a little bit about changing things in the middle of a fiscal year, because it's like, okay, well, we've passed a budget with this estimate now, this estimate, if we go find free, effective, unless we pull out the effective date, it's gonna change what we just passed some way. So we should talk about that too, but yeah, I think it's fine. I think I agree, we should mull it over and then maybe do some emails and see if people have other questions or other thoughts. If we can get to recommendation, great. If we can't, that's okay too, I think.
Right.
And
And I
if
think
we-
that's, it's important, Mark, because it's, as we come into the audit next month, and
Right.
then Sherry and Sherry will begin to construct that budget. That's important information to have when that budget, which we will be putting together, we'll be working on all December, and and have to you as soon as we can, or early in the next year. So this is a timely discussion to be had, is what I'm saying. It's not too late, but it's a good discussion to be having right now as well.
So before we leave, is it a goal to have some kind of recommendation, maybe not majority, to go to the full board too? Are we just having a discussion? So that's helpful for me to know what
I think-
the goal process is.
Yeah, my thought is that if we want to give some time on the issue outside of a regular board meeting, and we should talk more, and people should email freely. If we can get to a recommendation, that's all the better. It doesn't have to be unanimous, and if we can't, that's okay too. And then we would kind of keep the issue on the December, November, December, maybe January agenda, or maybe skip November, maybe in December agenda, with a discussion of a lot fuller discussion. If we get to recommendation, great. If we can't, that's okay too. But I'm
So
open
I'm
if other
always-
people have thoughts.
I'm always a little fuzzy on how in-depth of a conversation we can have on email. Can we just talk about everything on email, even though we're not in a board meeting?
You are allowed to talk about things via email because it is asynchronous. It's not, it's not this discussion, which we have in public, because everybody is, those of you who are here are able to hear each other and talk to each other. You are allowed to email with each other. You're able to seek my input if you're interested in that as well by email. So.
Plus, any information request is totally in bounds. Like if you wanted to, I thought of something else, and do we have data on this, or what do we know about that? That's all fine. That's just a it's a policy advice type thing. So,
Right. We work for you. So if you have
Okay.
information that you need, we'll work as hard as we can to get it to you.
But you didn't say polling people for
Right.
voting on a recommendation either way. So that should happen in some kind of a meeting,
In the
or
committee, or it just goes, hey, the committee met. We took a deep dive here. If you want to review it, it's available on YouTube,
Mhm.
and then it can go directly to the board, and then we can have that discussion with the full board. It doesn't have to take place in this committee. But I wanted, there was clearly a desire to have this conversation. Some folks maybe not super interested in that, and so we wanted to have a space to have the conversation. So.
I would just for my 2 cents, I would value the committee, if people have time, coming up with a recommendation. Again, it doesn't have to be unanimous. If we're gonna spend the time, how I'm used to boards working is committee is gonna come up with a recommendation. And it seems like the board has discussed this before, many times perhaps before I even joined. So I think it might be advantageous for the board, for the committee, even if it's a half-hour meeting. Everyone's, what are the final questions? If that makes sense, to have some kind of recommendation to say, we met, here's a recommendation, we can open it up for discussion. You can question the committee about what, blah, 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 blah. But I feel like to say we met and we had a discussion has happened before. So it would be my recommendation is that we try to come back together, even briefly, to say, what are the last questions, and are we able at this point to come up with a recommendation? And if not, so be it.
I would say that the difference this time is that we're going to have a board meeting where we vote on it,
Right.
right? So I don't see the point in making a recommendation if it's not unanimous. That seems not of great use.
I don't know if the recommendation is unanimous or not, because I don't think we've discussed what the what the recommendation would be, but. So I'm saying coming back and assessing people, like, are we at a place to make a recommendation, and would it be unanimous? And if not, then we can dig another road.
Okay, well, we can
Yeah,
talk about,
I think it's best. Let's think about this. We have a lot of data. Thank you, Catherine, for all that great data and presentation. Let's come back after the November it's not gonna be on the November board meeting, but right after that, before Thanksgiving, let's have another, and I would make it public. Let's do a YouTube, even if we don't have to. Let's make it public and have another meeting scheduled for an hour. We can always end early. And if we can get to a recommendation, great. Unanimous would be better, obviously. If we can't, then or if we have a recommendation that's not unanimous, we note that for the next full board meeting. I think that's what I would say. Let's do something after the. I don't know I can't remember when the November board meeting is, but
it's the 12th.
12th, between the 12th and
think.
whatever Thanksgiving is,
For some reason, why do I think that's the 12th? Anyway, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
not right at all.
No.
It's the 8th. Oh, it's super early.
Okay. Well, that gives us more time between the 8th and
Yes,
Thanksgiving.
and Thanksgiving.
Look at it in a positive way.
Okay, awesome. Yes, it happened so early. Awesome.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
thank you, everybody. Are you ready? You want to adjourn?
Yeah, I'll call for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay.
Second.
Okay. Great. Well, thanks everyone for the time.